Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Norma Juarez. I am a proud alumna and staff member in UNC's Alumni Relations Office. Thank you all for joining us today for the Alumni Career Panel, Wildlife, Outdoors, and Recreation. Today, we will learn from and connect with fellow UNC Bears working in these industries. But before I introduce you to our panelists, I would like to share a couple of housekeeping items with all of you. The event is being recorded and it will be available a week after the event, so you can rewatch or share. I will go off camera once introductions are gone, and I will also be sharing contact information from our panelists and our moderator, so feel free to reach out and ask any questions. And I do encourage you to use the Q&A feature of the event to ask questions from your fellow Bears. Now, please help me welcome our panelists. Panelists, can you please introduce yourself by stating your name, title, company, your UNC degree, and telling us a little bit about yourself. And Daniel, we will start with you.
All right, thanks, Norma. My name is Dan Konzik. I graduated from UNC in 2010 with a degree in geography and an emphasis in GIS. And I currently work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in their Natural Resources Program Center out of Fort Collins, Colorado, as a GIS specialist. Thank you.
Thank you. Carissa?
Thank you. I'm Carissa King, and I graduated in 2014 with a degree in biology and a minor in chemistry. I work for the Wildlife Conservation Society as a research assistant, and my job is primarily focused on studying whales and dolphins that occur off of the coasts of New York and New Jersey.
Thank you. Doug?
All right, and I'm Doug Mays. I am the Renewable Resources Branch Chief for the Bureau of Land Management in Wyoming. I graduated in 1999 with a degree in geography and a minor in earth science. Currently, my role is as the Renewable Resources Branch Chief. We have a team of program leads who manage mostly wildlife programs, range management, fisheries, wild horse and burrow, and greater sage grouse. I left UNC and Colorado in 1999, and I returned in 2016. So I've been back for about 5 years, and I'm loving being back.
Thank you, Doug. And now I will hand it over to Lauren, who will be our facilitator this afternoon. Lauren?
Great. Thank you, Norma. Hi, everybody. It's great to have you here for this panel. My name is Lauren Benedict. I'm a faculty member in the School of Biological Sciences here at UNC. And I study wildlife, and that's part of how I got involved here. I'm mostly interested in research on birds, but also teaching some classes related to animals and the outdoors and ecology and things like that. So it's really fun for me to talk to alumni in those fields. It's pretty exciting. So I'm ready to jump in. I'm going to ask them some questions, and we'll sort of get a sense of what their careers entail. If you have questions as we go, I can try to throw those in. Please put them in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to kind of mix it up and ask as we go. So looking forward to it. But the first thing, we're just going to start with a little bit of kind of background, and I'm going to ask each panelist here what jobs, internships, or coursework from your time at UNC led you into your current position. And so kind of how was your degree at UNC important to what you're doing now? And we will start with Carissa on that one.
So to begin with, I was a member of Dr. Benedict's lab. So all of the research experience that I gained in that lab was hugely valuable and is one reason that I have the job that I have today. The computer program that I learned in Dr. Benedict's lab is the computer program I use almost every day now. I was born and raised in Colorado, so from a landlocked state, and now I'm studying marine mammals. I kind of got started in studying marine mammals by doing an internship at the Clearwater Marine Aquarium down in Florida. And that gave me experience specifically with bottlenose dolphins and really let me discover that I am fascinated by dolphins and was really interested in doing more about their vocalizations. And so then that led me into really focusing more on animal communication and vocalizations. And that's led to my master's degree after I earned my bachelor's at UNC.
Great, thank you. And Doug, I'll send it over to you, the same question.
All right, yeah, so when I was here back in the late 90s, GIS was really just kind of coming into its own. And so the GIS coursework I took here, I kind of knew that was going to be where my bread was buttered at the moment. There was job opportunities, and it was really an interesting field, and it was broadly applicable. And so that was kind of my gateway then into my early career, and that bridge into natural resource management and outdoor work. The other thing that I really enjoyed from my time here at UNC was the ability to engage in research. Working with the geography department, and Jim Dorner is still there. We did I went with him on a field a sediment coring study up in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, and it was an altering event for me. It was really it really opened my eyes to what the possibilities were, and the opportunities out there in both the academic world and outside of that. And just, it wasn't always about classwork. There was some really cool stuff that you could engage in when you engaged in that research. So
yeah, that's great. I think all of those sound pretty exciting. Okay, so please, Daniel, tell us your perspective too.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, UNC absolutely provided a great foundation for me to with the work that I've done. I've worked for the National Park Service for 7 years. I actually got that job through UNC, as well as an internship with a company that used to be called Digital Globe. They provide satellite imagery, and they fly some satellites collecting that imagery. So I was doing market research for them as an intern during my time at UNC. Both of those jobs laid the foundation for me to be able to get this job that I'm in now and continue to work my way up in the Fish and Wildlife Service, which is exactly where I want to be. But the technical experience that I had through the GIS lab, the courses in sustainability and geography that I was able to take at UNC absolutely paved the way for me to be able to get these jobs working in public service for conservation type agencies.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And it sounds like there's some commonalities there. GIS in general is a very useful skill. I think we can all agree. And having those real world experiences, hands-on field experiences and internships, things like that seem super valuable. Great. Okay, so our next general question that we want to ask all the panelists is, what do you do day to day? What does your day to day look like? What are you doing? Tell us a little bit about what your job entails. Do you still get to spend time outdoors? And, is it rewarding? Do you feel like you're making a difference in the world? So for this one, we're going to start with Doug.
So my day to day right now is not really what I would want to talk about, honestly. No, it is rewarding. We work at a little bit of a higher level in the state office. We really work with policy, and we work with our local, like our cooperators. We work with Fish and Wildlife Service a lot. We work with U.S. Forest Service, Wyoming Game and Fish Department. Everything we manage, of course, is mutually managed. There is no exclusivity across habitats, across species. Management decisions impact our neighbors. Oil and gas development is something that happens, and we need to work with those cooperators to come to the best possible solutions for both them and for the species and habitats that we manage. But more fun, and more importantly, early career was really, like I mentioned, I got into natural resource management through GIS. I worked for the Department of Defense, and we worked closely with our natural resource management team. Many people don't know the environmental stewardship the Department of Defense engages in on the lands that they own and manage. And that is really where I sort of grew my passion. I worked in the Southeast in South Carolina, and there was endangered species that we managed, the red cockaded woodpecker, and it was a comprehensive management plan that we had to engage in, including prescribed fire and other long-term strategies to manage that species and protect its habitat. So that was the more fun day-to-day stuff when, early career, when you can get out, get in the field. I think that's the thing that all of us lament as we move through, is that it's more office time for sure. And we always look back, all the folks on my team wish they could get out in the field. I encourage them to get out in the field, and I go with them when I can. But it's not the day-to-day reality anymore. But I think that is one of the reasons why we all get into this field, is to work outdoors and see the landscapes and begin to intimately know those places and spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really well said. So Daniel, I'll send it to you for the next answer here.
Sure. Yeah, I echo Doug's sentiment. I wish I was in the field a lot more than I am. I work for a national science office, so the scientists that I work with and our technical GIS team, data management team, we provide tools and support for projects across the country. So the National Wildlife Refuge System is managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We support scientific work being done on national wildlife refuges across the country. So I help a lot with developing protocols and developing tools to collect field data that will ensure that if you're collecting water bird data in North Carolina, that data will sync up with the data being collected in Michigan, and we can provide those large landscape analysis. So I do a lot of data management. I do a lot of technical development. Probably a third of my day is spent in meetings with different folks across the country, talking about what their project is and what the needs are and how we can support them. And then the other 2/3 of my day are technical development, spent behind a computer. Similarly to Doug, I had some pretty amazing adventures when I first got going. Working for the National Park Service, I got to do a 6-day canoe trip along the Rio Grande River, along the Mexico-U.S. border, doing some mapping work down there, some survey work. That was pretty amazing. Right now, we're helping support some monarch butterfly monitoring across the country. So I've been able to go out and do some training for folks that are going to be actually doing the field work this summer. So I get to at least have my boots in the grass for a little bit and before I come back to my computer. But most of my outdoor adventures these days are personal endeavors.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I think we all love that outdoors. I mean, that's why we all go into wildlife, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
But I think you asked also about if you make a difference in this world. I think that public lands and the work that Carissa is doing, supporting wildlife and wild places, public lands in general, I think is an amazing and beautiful institution, and absolutely dedicating a career to an agency as a public servant, being able to ensure that those places exist for future generations is certainly worth a career.
All right, so then I'll ask Carissa to weigh in on this one as well.
So my day-to-day depends on the time of year. Right now, because it's winter, I don't have any field work. So my day is spent behind a computer doing acoustic analyses. So we have a set of buoys out in the water right now, and we review the data that they collect for whale vocalizations. So that is my wintertime job. Now, during the summer, my time is more focused on field work. And so I do get to go out on a boat and I get to look for whales and dolphins along New York and New Jersey. And I get to have that experience. Sometimes I'm out on the boat once a week, sometimes it's up to 3 times a week. So it really just depends on the weather for us. But we do have a very heavy field work component to everything that we do. And in terms of, do I feel like I'm making a difference? Most definitely. The data that we're gathering is being actively used to help guide the development of renewable energy off the coast of New York. And we are helping to gather the baseline information that will allow for responsible and sustainable development of that renewable energy. So the work that I'm doing now is going to have a long-term impact for this region. And it's very exciting to be a part of this work.
Sounds like it's probably a lot of fun too. I would imagine being out there watching and listening to those amazing mammals would be really a lot of fun. So
nothing better than seeing some humpback whales jump out of the water. It's some of the most awe-inspiring events I've ever seen.
That's great. And isn't it wonderful that you can have a job where you get to do that? I mean, and I'll just weigh in quickly here. I'm an ornithologist. I study birds. And part of the reason I went into this field is because at some point during my undergraduate career, I realized there were people who did this, and you get to just go out and watch birds for a living. And there are, of course, other components to it, but it's just sort of really rewarding to be in that space, you know, studying ecology and wildlife and wildlands and supporting all of those resources. Okay, so we have another question that I'll ask, and I'll say again to anybody who's watching, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. We can ask them as we go. I'm happy to, you know, inject your questions anywhere here, so feel free to add those. And then while we're waiting for questions to come in from the audience, I'll just keep asking my questions. So the next one is, knowing what you know now, if you could go back to your collegiate years, back to UNC, what would you tell your younger self? Are there things that you would change, or are there things that you would do again? And this time, we're going to start with Daniel.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. There were a lot of wonderful things about my time at UNC. A lot of the classes and the projects that I got to work in, focusing on GIS, were very memorable. And as I mentioned before, really did set a good foundation for my career. What I would do differently, my view of GIS has changed quite a bit. I view GIS as a tool to be applied to something you love. So I really didn't spend a lot of time pursuing conservation and some of the sciences that I wish I would have in my undergraduate degree. I would have spent a lot more time, I think, in Dr. Benedict, your department, working on some biology classes. I honestly took the fastest route to a degree that I could. And because I spent 4 years in the Navy before coming to UNC, and I wanted to get back in the workforce as quickly as possible. So I was taking 18 or 21 credits a semester, and all of it was like hit the minimum requirements to graduate, and let's see what else is out there. So I would have pursued some additional classes and some additional summer opportunities, like the field work experiences that Doug had. I really didn't do those because I could get a lot more credits done in the summer if I were to stay around campus and crank through them. Since I've left UNC, I am actually graduating this May with a master's in natural resources degree from the University of Idaho. And that has opened up entirely new doors. And I wish I would have pursued some of those coursework in ecology and biology and everything while I was doing my undergraduate degree, so that I could apply GIS, the technical skills of GIS, to this area that I'm really passionate about. So I would encourage anybody listening to ensure that if you're going like the technical route, make sure you're a master at the technical stuff for sure, but also take some classes and get those experiences in something that you absolutely love, that you want to apply those tools towards.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I will say, for those of you listening who are still planning out courses of study, of course, we have minors in all of these things. So whatever your major is, you can always look into minor options to go with it. Yeah. So I'll send this one to Carissa next.
One thing that I am so grateful I did while I was at UNC was take advantage of participating in research. There's not a lot of undergraduate universities that let you get your hands dirty quite the same way that UNC does. And I am so grateful that I had the opportunity and could really build up that experience, especially if you're looking to go into a field that has research in it. Years of experience is so important. And so even entry-level positions often still want to see 1 or 2 years of experience in some kind of research. So maybe if you have the opportunity to do some research while you're at UNC, take advantage of it, do it. Even if it's not exactly what you think you want to do for your career, it's still going to look amazing on your CV and will still give you that really valuable experience to know what kind of research do you want to do. Do you want to be in a lab? Do you want to be out in the field? Also, don't be afraid to take courses in something that you're not as interested in. So if you really want to go into wildlife, maybe take some courses in genetics and have some of that background in genetics as well, because so often within research or within the field studying wildlife, genetics comes in. GIS is something that I had to learn after the fact. So go outside of just your field of study and take advantage of the wide variety of courses that you have while you're at UNC. One course I really, really wish I would have taken is something that taught me how to use RStudio. I've had to learn after the fact how to write my own code in RStudio to do statistical analyses. And that is a tool that researchers are using more and more. So having even just the basic level of familiarity with it will give you a step up against a lot of other people.
Thanks, Carissa. All right, I'll send this one to Doug for the last answer. And then I see we have a question come in the Q&A, so we'll get to that next.
Okay, so I will say, I agree with both what Carissa and Dan said, and I would add, and this is one thing that we always say, but take more math classes. I was afraid of math classes. My roommate was a math major and computer science major, and I just think to myself sometimes, gosh, I wish I had sat in some of those classes with Brian. It would have helped me with my GIS career progression for sure. You know, programming, when I think, 10 or 15 years ago, typically in the GIS world, there was 2 or 3 different titles, and they were essentially graded titles of GIS. And now there's application development. There's all sorts of worlds of difference between what you can do in GIS career-wise now versus then. Engage, like Carissa said, engage in the research. It is something that at the time I didn't realize those opportunities they're not everywhere. I went and got my master's degree from University of South Carolina in geography, focused in climate and climatology. And most of the research opportunities in our department, it was a bigger department, but we did not have many undergraduate students there. We had one undergraduate assistant who helped in our climate lab. And that wasn't true for every one of the research labs either in our department. So there's a wonderful resource and opportunity here at UNC. I think that the size is just right. There's enough engagement in that, and there are opportunities for undergraduates to really get involved in that research. And it opens your eyes to some different opportunities, makes you look at the world a little differently. And it also piques your interest in other things. So that's, I agree with both what Dan and Carissa said, that those things are awesome. And I tried to take a wide variety of classes. I took a creative writing class. I took, philosophy, like tried to train both sides of my brain. It didn't work that well, but it turned out okay.
That's good to hear. Yeah, and so I think I'm going to follow up with the first question that we have in our Q&A. This is from an anonymous attendee who says, I'm not getting a degree in anything related to the outdoors or wildlife or biology, but I think it's really admirable and interesting. Are there jobs available related to the field for someone who doesn't have those kinds of degrees? So I guess I would ask all of you to think about who you work with, and do you work with people in your field regularly who come from different kinds of educational degree backgrounds? And I'll let anybody answer this one.
Yeah, I can jump in for just a second. Federal service, right? And we manage a great deal of public lands. We have support offices, right? I mean, it's the full gamut of any other industry. You can work in finance, you can be an economist. We have an economist in our office. HR, of course. There's all sorts of management and administrative support roles that are not directly related to being a wildlife biologist, for example. And in most cases, there is, the way federal career fields are broken out, there are some fields that are degree positive, they call them. You have to have a certain type of degree to be in a certain classification, but there are many that are not. I worked as for example, I worked as an 0301 federal service, and there's no degree requirement with that. You can have had no degree or any degree can fit into those as long as you can demonstrate the skills for the job.
I'll hop in too there. With the Wildlife Conservation Society, there's so many different jobs there. And we have IT, we have HR, we have our design team. And so they're the ones that are responsible for putting together all of like the public facing displays. So the Wildlife Conservation Society runs 5 zoos in the New York area: Bronx Zoo, Central Park Zoo, Prospect Park Zoo, and 2 more, Queens Zoo and the New York Aquarium. So there's so many different opportunities at the Wildlife Conservation Society. And even if you don't have a degree in wildlife or biology, but you're maybe interested in exploring a career in there, it's really about what kind of experience can you bring to the table. So if maybe you don't have as much of a background in biology, but you have a really strong background in computer science, and you can write new programs that could be used for running certain analyses, you can bring a huge skill set and a lot of value to a team and be able to get into a wildlife or science related career through that route too.
Yeah, I totally agree with Doug and Carissa. I would find an agency or an organization or a company that you really respect the work that they're doing and respect their mission. And I bet there's some opportunities for your skill set and your background to be able to plug in somewhere. And then don't rule out the opportunity to get an advanced degree at some point once you really figure out what you want to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of opportunities. And one more that I'll just sort of emphasize a connection to UNC. Of course, we have a lot of great programs in education and outdoor education, environmental education, just education and stewardship. really is a huge area where there are a lot of people working in that field. So if you're interested, it's one that doesn't require a specific degree, and I think is really important for conserving wildlife in the outdoors and all of that. Good. Okay. And then we have another question here in the Q&A that I'll ask you guys, which is that, do you struggle with burnout? Is it hard to be engaged and fulfilled when you are outside every day as a job, or not outside every day, but at least working with the outdoors as a job each day? And again, I'll just sort of put this one out there for anyone who'd like to answer.
I can start since I went last time. I mean, I think burnout happens in anything you do, and that's why you have opportunities to take vacations. And for me, if I'm sitting behind a computer for a month at a time and working on some application or whatever, and yeah, I start to feel a little bit of pressure and desire, especially with, when I start to think about, man, I got into this to be outside and do these things. But you know what, you go for a hike, you go camping, you go visit. I go visit a national wildlife refuge, and it re-energizes you. So, and there's, my agency has over 7,000 employees. There's other jobs out there that still are working towards the goal of protecting wildlife and wild places. So for sure, burnout will happen, I think, in anything you do. But overall, when you look at a career working for 40 years or more, I can't really think of anything else that I'd rather be doing than dedicating those 40, 50 years to. So
yeah, and I'll jump in because I think burnout for me happens more in the short term. Like tough weeks, right? We work, Dan and I both work in the deeply embedded in the bureaucracy, and that can be a little tough. But at the end of the day, right, we have responsibilities to the taxpayers and the dollars that we are accountable for. I often say we're in the accountability business more so than the productivity business, because it makes me sleep better at night. Because there are days when it feels like you're not going to get anything done, and sometimes weeks. But we have laws and regulations and policies, and that's really what governs what we do and how we do it. And it gives us those parameters for what we do. The grass isn't always greener, but also you do have to recognize, there are times we probably have all made changes in our career paths or in our jobs. And it is important to recognize that there are times when it's time to go. It's time to look and find something that's a little bit better, even if it's not going to be, sometimes change is the right thing, even if it's not, incredibly better somewhere else. The change is good. I've worked in different areas. I've worked as a survey crew team. I've worked for county governments. I've worked for the federal government. I've worked as a contractor, and I've outdoors and indoors. So I always try to keep my options open. There's no way to stave off burnout, but and you're not entitled to your ideal path. But the best thing you can do is make choices along the way to these opportunities that open up. Be open to them. Don't be afraid to take a chance here and there and be uncomfortable for a little while.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Burnout, unfortunately, just seems to be a fact of life sometimes. And there comes a point where you just have to either change careers or take some time for yourself. Go for the hike, take an extra day off. Even go if you feel like, okay, I'm getting bogged down in the work I'm doing, I'm getting bored. It's okay to go talk to your boss and be like, hey, is there something else I can take on? Or show the initiative of, if you see there's a new project coming up, be like, volunteer to work on that project and mix up your day-to-day position. I say one thing I really enjoy about my position is I do have that variety. So in the winter, it can be very just computer heavy. But if there is something new coming down, I can talk to my boss and be like, hey, I'd like to help out on that project. And even just one day away from working on what you've been doing, what you're starting to feel burnout with, can be rejuvenating. And then once I really get sick and tired of the computer, usually that's when I get to go out in the field. So like, don't be afraid of asking for change or seeking out that change or finding the variety or even creating the variety within your own position. I think there's ways to do it and be very successful with it.
Yeah, thanks all. I think all of that is really great advice for sort of any career path, right? Our field as well as others. We've had another really interesting question come in here in the Q&A, and this one sounds pretty fun. The question is, what's the most rewarding project you've worked on in your career? Is there one that sticks out to you, or is it all rewarding? Dan, I'll pick you first.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I like this question a lot. It gets me thinking about some really fun projects that I've worked on. When I worked for the National Park Service doing boundary mapping, I got to clean up the boundary at Redwoods National Park, which you'd think that would have been done when it was established in the 60s. It really wasn't. There was a lot of legal complications to that boundary, and we just cleaned them up probably 6-7 years ago when I was working on it. So that was interesting. There's nobody really cares except for our agency and a few landowners, but it was pretty fulfilling. The one that I've been working on the last 4 years, maybe a little controversial, but also very, very important. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Department of Interior had a priority to expand opportunities for hunting and fishing on public lands. And there's a lot of reasons why they did that. Hunting and fishing, fund conservation, and there's a lot of other benefits that I would be happy to talk to anybody about offline. I spent a lot of time thinking about it personally and professionally, so I do enjoy speaking about that. But it was a huge effort, and it was fun and stood out because it was a 4 years long effort. We started by developing some new applications that would help us collect a tremendous amount of data. We had people go to every national wildlife refuge and assess opportunities, and then assess where we could potentially expand opportunities. We had to categorize all that. We had to make all kinds of clever reports through that. So it was fun in the innovation aspect of it. It was fun in the collaboration aspects of that project, and it was fairly successful, which always makes you feel good. So that one definitely stands out, and it's partially because I spent the last 4 years working on it, but partially just because of the scale and what was required to make it successful.
Yeah, sounds like something with a really big impact, which is always rewarding. Let's see, I'll ask Carissa next.
I guess in terms of just something in general that's rewarding is being able to see a project go from start to finish and being able to help with every aspect of that and being able to help plan the project, where certain equipment is going to go, such as recorders into the water for me, collecting that data, running it, like swapping out the recorders, analyzing everything, and then getting to the paper stage and actually having a paper get published. So that seeing that start to end is really exciting. Being able to be kind of like trying new techniques is also really rewarding. We just finished a pilot study looking at environmental DNA. And we just had that paper get published, and I was there to help collect the water samples, filter the water samples, and then I got to see the results of what species were we detecting, how successful was it when we collected water right after we had a humpback pass by the boat, and then could we still find that DNA 30 minutes later? So just being able to see like how a project progresses is very rewarding and feels really good when you get that acceptance for a publication.
Absolutely. And just for people who don't know environmental DNA well, so you collect the water and then you can use DNA analysis to identify all the individual whales that were right there. How does that work? Is that the goal?
So yeah, so we collect usually a Nalgene bottle size amount of water, and first right where the whale surfaced, and then we are able to take that and we filter it out. So we use this really, really fine, it's really essentially a fiberglass type of filter, and the DNA in there gets caught on that filter, and then one of our colleagues is able to extract that DNA, sequence it, and assign it to the species level for now. So we haven't been able to get to the individual level, but that is a future prospect of, could we collect water samples and then be able to relate that to a specific individual whale? that we have seen in the New York area every year for the past 5 years, for example. We also were able to see what kind of fish species were in the area. And we were able to confirm that one of the fish species we were watching the humpbacks feed on, we collected that DNA for that specific fish species in every single water sample that we collected. So it was really cool to see all of the different species we were able to detect using really just a Nalgene bottle of water that we essentially leaned over the side of the boat and scooped it up. It very low tech sometimes is the best way to collect data.
Neat. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Thanks. All right, Doug, what's your favorite project?
Yeah, first, that sounds awesome, Carissa. Like, that's really cool. And I've heard we're working with different different partners on some environmental DNA stuff too, on public lands in different places. It's really pretty fascinating stuff to like see if there's presence of endangered species in some places. It's really amazing to do that kind of work. I'm not thinking about a specific project, but one of the things that I guess one of the things that comes to mind is when I was working for the Air Force as a contractor in natural resource management. We had a bombing range. That was where we mostly worked, of course, because the other part is Cantonment area with a runway and everything else. But we had red-cockaded woodpeckers on there. We had expanded that population, but we still needed to do a pretty significant amount of habitat management. And most of that in the Southeast, as some folks may know, comes with prescribed fire. The longleaf ecosystem is fire dependent. And so we had to reintroduce fire to this property. And it was a slow process. It was a slow burn, no pun intended. It took about 4 or 5 years to get us up to a place where we could burn on the regular, low intensity, low damage, as you can imagine, high fuel buildups in the first few years from just a long time of not having fire on the ground. And so that whole process was sort of really like, it was so cool to learn how you can use fire as a tool and how we were looking at the weather every day, looking at conditions, looking at ground conditions, looking at fuel loading, looking at age of the pine stand, looking at all these variables that you bring into play to put together a prescription and put fire on the ground. And you have to make adjustments to it throughout the day as you're literally riding along on a four-wheeler with an electronic torch on the back, shooting fire off the back. And it was a really fun job, but it was also a really complex set of variables that you put together to get fire on the ground and get these stands sort of back in good shape, with old longleaf, which are also susceptible to fire at their base. And you can easily screw this up and kill trees that are 150 years old. So that was sort of, proud, rewarding, all of those things. But it was also, it's one of the things I look back on in my career as like, I wish I could go back now. Like that was a very rewarding experience to be able to put fire on the ground and manage that. And we can debate natural or not, but a natural way. Yeah,
that sounds like absolutely fun and rewarding. So great, really interesting and different kinds of projects that people have worked on here. So super interesting to hear. Okay, I'll go on to one of our next questions. So everyone talks about the importance of networking. If you're going to get out there looking for a career, you might need to network. So can you give us some networking tips that you think might be useful for students or others who are attending this panel? And, particularly how networking works in your field in recreation, wildlife, and outdoors. And this one, let's see, I'll start with Carissa.
So networking is huge in research positions, whether you're wanting to go into academia or nonprofit. A lot of times, the best time to network is at a conference. So go to a conference, whether you're presenting or not, walk around the poster sessions and introduce yourself to people. See what kind of research they're doing. if you know you're moving or you are really interested in a particular area, look for topics in that specific area. That's actually how I met my boss and how I got my job. Was I saw him at a poster session at a conference, and I just walked up and introduced myself and said, "Hi, I'm looking for a job." And then I began volunteering with his team, then became an intern, and now I'm full-time. So don't be afraid to just kind of take that leap and introduce yourself to people. If you don't have the chance to go to a conference, but you read a paper that's really interesting, email one of the authors and just be like, "Hi, I'm really interested in your work. Do you need any volunteer help?" Especially right now, since we're remote, a lot of people maybe would be more willing to start working with people that aren't nearby. So don't be afraid to just reach out and introduce yourself, and sometimes it can work.
Thanks. Okay, let's see. Doug next. Yes.
And all these thoughts were running through my mind while Carissa was talking. The conferences, you don't ever know when the network is going to work, and that's the key. Is even if in the moment it doesn't feel like it's not going to be this necessarily this right away. The relationship is struck and the thing happens. I went to the Rocky Mountain Region Association of American Geographers Conference as a student at the University of Northern Colorado I want to say this was the 1998 year. It was in Bozeman, Montana. And I was up there, I watched this presentation on snow avalanche climatology, and it was, whatever, it was interesting, but it was like another presentation. The conference wasn't particularly interested in it, but I was there, talked to him a little bit afterwards for a minute or two, nothing, just said hello. I applied to graduate school at the University of South Carolina, and Carrie Mock was one of the people who was presenting on snow avalanche climatology, 8 years before or 5 years before. Did not know that there was a relationship there. We actually, we made that connection later, but you just never know. I was down at a conference when I was working for the Bureau. I was just down at a conference a couple of years ago. I met several folks from University of Northern Colorado at GIS in the Rockies, which takes place every year in Denver. So from my side also, I'm always like, the opportunities that I have now currently, I go to meet people, younger, older, up the chain, early career. The networking matters a ton. You never know who's on the other side of the interview table. And it has helped me in my career unintentionally in some ways, and in some ways intentionally, when you turn on the Zoom screen and for an interview, and it's like, oh, that's Jim. I know Jim, and he's doing the interview today. This is a pleasant surprise.
Great, Dan, I'll throw it over to you for a third answer here.
Thanks. I completely agree. Networking's huge. My current position, the guy that I interviewed with was a mentor in the Park Service. And so the networking has directly led to, is one of the reasons why I'm in the position I'm in now. I totally agree with everything that Doug and Chris have said, so I won't repeat it. One thing that I will say is whatever position you get directly out of school, even if it probably won't be your dream position, but even if it's not, do it very well and be the kind of person that you would want to work with in 5 or 10 years when you are in that dream position, because you never know who's going to be sitting, like Doug said, sitting across that interview table. And it could be somebody that you worked with in a entry-level job that neither of you really enjoyed, but you did it really well, and you were passionate about it, and you cared about people, you cared about the mission, you cared about the people that you worked with. They recall you as a good listener and somebody who is willing to work hard and learn new things and ask questions. And so just from the get-go, even if you're in a tough situation, make sure your coworkers are in that tough situation, are part of your network. And it's amazing how those things come back around sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with all of that too. And I'll say, I know that the Bears Alumni Network is one that tries to support students and all this kind of stuff. So if you feel like you really don't know anybody in the field or anything like that, reach out to the Bears Alumni Network. Talk to your professors, talk to anybody who's doing something related to what you want to do that you do know, to help sort of understand the field and where you can go to meet more people. That's great. Okay, well then I've got one last question for all of you. Hopefully there are lots of people out there listening who are looking to get into a career in this field. So I'll ask each of you to tell us what the career prospects are like in your field. What advice would you give students who are graduating? How should they go about looking for jobs and things that would help them break into your industry? So for this one, I will start with Doug.
Okay, I guess, it's hard sometimes to see outside of the federal world that I work in. And so I'll throw a few things out there, although I know there are many places to look for jobs in that run the gamut. And my focus is geography and GIS, but all the way through natural resources, wildlife biology. Wildlife and actually one just came to mind, and it was the Warnell College of Forestry and Natural Resource Management, University of Georgia. They post a ton of great jobs. But for federal service, it really comes down to USA Jobs as far as like where to find them. It's a cumbersome site. It's a cumbersome process. Everybody just acknowledges that up front. So talk to somebody who applied successfully. I tell people, I do that myself when I'm applying for a different federal position. I run it by somebody who's in federal service, look at the resume, check the job description out, make sure things are in alignment and it looks good. There's no guarantees there. The job prospects, I would say at the moment are pretty good in federal service. And, so a lot of times maybe folks think about agencies like within federal service for natural resource management type of jobs, wildlife, outdoor recreation. There is a whole bevy of contract positions available too that, outside corporations use in order to comply with federal regulations. So it's not just federal government. I thought it was actually when I first started my career that was primarily where it was, but there are many, many opportunities out there with contract companies who do wildlife work, who do research, nonprofit NGOs out there as well who do that type of research and that type of work. They're actually, I think the prospects are pretty good in our field. And, it changes with different administrations and different economies, but the money is there right now, to be honest with you. There's a lot of work that folks want to have done that needs to be done. And so I think the prospects are pretty good. I would say be multiple. I tell people that all the time that I meet who are, engaging in their first jobs, first early parts of their career. I did. I wouldn't change it. You can still develop your subject matter expertise, but take those opportunities, start a job. And if, like Carissa said, if you're kind of bored, talk to your boss and say, hey, are there other things that I can do here? This isn't, it's not that I won't do my job that I'm currently hired to do, but what other opportunities are there to help out or to gain other experiences? So I always say be multiple, because it helps you, and especially it helps you down the line when you're later in your career and you can reach back and say, hey, I do have experience here. I have credible experience working in these different areas. I'm not just a one-trick pony, if you will, doing one thing. I've done many things.
Thanks, that's great to hear. I put the USA Jobs link in the chat if people want to check it out. Dan, I'll ask you the same question.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, the other link that you put in the chat, I was going to bring up the LinkedIn UNC's Earth and Environmental Network. They post a lot of jobs. Dr. Jessica Sallow posts a lot of jobs. When my office hires, I make sure to email her and they put those jobs in there. There's another really cool organization called American Conservation Experience. I'm going to post that link in the chat. Those are a little bit more akin to internships. We hire a lot of folks for like 6-month temp jobs through ACE. They have these ACE Epic internships. They pay pretty good if you're just getting right out of school, and there's some really, really cool jobs there. I agree with Doug. I think there are a lot of jobs right now. I think, and there's going to be more. There's certain areas that, like you said, with every administration, different priorities come about. There's going to be money being allocated for like wildland firefighting, things like that. So those are always interesting jobs. If you want to get some experience this summer, just get your boots really dirty and go see if you can be a wildland firefighter for a summer, and that can open up a lot of doors. Yeah, I think the job prospects are pretty good.
That's good to hear. All right, Carissa, how about you?
So I can really only speak from the experience of the marine mammal field. And unfortunately, the marine mammal field is one where it's a little more challenging to find those full-time positions. Unfortunately, funding can sometimes be limited to those. So if you're really looking to get into the marine mammal field and you think that's something that's interesting to you, one of the best pieces of advice that I got and used is to take advantage of volunteer and internship opportunities. Get your foot in the door. And you don't necessarily have to do volunteering or internship full time. When I first started, I was part-time teaching, and I was doing volunteer work with Wildlife Conservation Society 1 or 2 days a week. So do what you can, but if you can get your foot in the door when it comes time for those full-time positions, which sometimes with like the grant writing process to create those full-time positions, it can be a year or two process before that full-time position is ready. But if you're there and you've shown really good work ethic and you've made those good connections, your name's going to be at the top of the list. So I can put into the chat specifically for the marine mammal field, there is an email listserv called Marmam, and there's constantly volunteer positions, internships, and full-time positions being posted on there. So if you're interested in just keeping an eye out there for different opportunities, that's a great listserv to keep an eye on. So I'll put that into the chat for everybody.
Great, thank you. And I'll say for anybody who's interested in other kind of specific subfields, there are often job boards for your specific subfield. So if you were interested in birds, there's one for birds, and there's one for marine mammals and so on. So whatever you're interested in, just try and find the societies or the groups that are working in those areas and start looking for opportunity postings there. Yeah. And then that other link, yeah, that Dan mentioned that I put in there, UNC has this Earth Environmental Network that has really nice web pages about the programs we offer, but then also some good job hunt advice and some contacts. And they have a Twitter feed that posts lots of local jobs in this area. So I encourage you all to check that out and follow that. I want to thank everybody, all the panelists, for joining us. It was really fun to talk to you all today, and I'll throw it back over to Norma.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank everybody, all of our panelists and our moderator, and all of you watching and joining us this afternoon. It's always an honor to host such great alumni and to get to hear your experience, your perspective, and such great insight that you provide. I was listening and my mind was just blown with all the amazing work that you all are doing. So thank you for your time, your expertise. Again, thank you all for joining us, and go Bears.